Was it cold? It was cold. So far from home, he had so many things on his mind, so many things to keep in mind, but cold was a sensation that cut through it all, even if he couldn't feel it. More so than the cold, it was the wet. Everything brought back memories of a time not long ago, a life of dark alleys and damp streets pockmarked by puddles pooling in potholes and wagon ruts. A life huddled in cold, damp corners where even sleeping was a deadly risk. A life in which life had no value in itself. He shook the rain from his hair and wiped his brow. That life was behind him now, or was it? Looking at his surroundings, it only seemed that he had left it for a while. Now he had returned. Looks like you're still alive. A dull sheen glinted in the morning gloom as he turned and drew his blade. The owner of the voice only flashed a grin at his startled reaction. An edge of annoyance played through his body. She knew. They both knew. It was too late. Too slow. Too unaware. Too inexperienced. If she had come to kill him, he would have been dead before he knew it. The woman across from him produced a brown paper package. "You're up, kid," her voice was soft. Despite what she was asking him to do, despite the cold, hard edge to her voice, he thought there was warmth hidden in her words. Affection. Like the big sister he never had. Or maybe it was because she was really pretty and that was twisting things, putting feelings in that weren't actually there. He reached out and took the package, fixing it to a rough leather belt under his worn woolen mantle. Is there more? No. But, is it enough? A warm hand cupped his right cheek. The woman had come forward, but he hadn't noticed until he felt her touch. Her coral eyes fixed his own. He shifted in embarrassment at how close she was. "I know you're used to working alone," the woman's voice was still soft, but firm. "But that's the past and it sucked anyway. You're part of something bigger now, you need to trust the job." He swallowed. The job. Trusting people was hard. Trusting a lot of people was harder. Her slender fingers trailed over his cheek and the woman drew her hand away. Her stern expression melted into a charming smile. "If I were my sister," she said, "I'd have taken a real fancy to you. Too bad. Also, you're too clean, you can't act all spoiled out here." The woman stepped back, pulling a soiled cloth from her pouch. Red stains joined the brown ones as she wiped her left hand. His eyes widened and he touched his cheek. His fingers came away with the scent of blood. Did you kill someone?" "Yeah." He was an obstacle, so he was disposed of. She may as well have been a chatty prostitute for all the care she showed about killing a man in cold blood. He watched her put away the cloth and stretch languidly in the shadows of the alley. And then she vanished without a trace. A distant clip-clop of hooves and wheels jouncing over the dirt road sounded in the distance. He drew himself further into the shadows, away from the street. After washing his face with dirty water, he pulled a thin length of ragged cloth from where it was tucked behind his belt. Holding it over his head, he turned and left the alley, making his way through the mud and the rain. Other people were already out and about, both children and adults whose overall feeling matched his own. No, that wasn't right. He matched theirs. That was why he was here, after all. He kept walking, past the wharves with their fishing boats and the men and women tending to their nets. The lane curved and he followed it up the slope until he came to a market where fishmongers were dousing their stands with buckets of water. They paid him no mind as he shuffled by. To them, he was probably just another wave drifting through the streets, one of hundreds of thousands of children driven from their villages by the flames of war. In the 2 weeks since his arrival, he had followed his instructions: study the people, become one of them. Honestly, it wasn't that hard since he was sort of the same. His father died fighting a war, or at least he went to war and never returned. His mother disappeared not long after that. He eyed some other children as they picked their way over the waterlogged ruts and holes in the street. Some of them carried things that they found, things that they thought valuable, scavenged from the broken buildings and piles of refuse. Old boots. Bundles of rags. Splintered planks of wood and scraps of metal. A girl half his age walked down the opposite side of the street, licking a gash on her palm with tears in her eyes. A jagged piece of iron was held gingerly in the fingers of her other hand. It had hurt her, but she couldn't let it go. She needed to eat. Other children stopped to look up at the adults with big, round eyes, holding hands to their meager bellies. They asked if there was work that they could do. If there was no work, they begged for food. If there was no food, The stupid ones stayed and kept asking for help. The smart ones kept going. Every breath pointlessly spent was energy that they wouldn't have to ask the next adult. They were just like him. Or they would become just like he was. At least if they survived. Losing one's parents was just the beginning. Life happened after that. War was just something that happened. What happened after that showed people for what they really were. He stopped at a small billboard at the corner of the market. Several men eyed the soggy parchments posted there. The numbers he knew, but he couldn't read the letters. Not that he couldn't read letters, he worked hard to learn how over the past year, they were just letters he didn't know. Letters of a different language. "Hey kid," a gangly man with a leather cap and a rat smile looked down at him. "Can you read what it says?" When he shook his head in response, the man clicked his tongue and spit on the ground, giving him a dirty look before stomping off. He probably wanted to use him. Just like in his old hometown, most people couldn't read. Being able to read meant one's parents taught them, which meant that they probably taught them other things too. Kids like that could be sold, especially in a place like this. "Weakness is sin," came a voice from his opposite shoulder. "Become stronger." He turned his attention to the source of the voice. "That's what the words you were looking at say," a man in a drab shopkeeper's outfit said. "Huh? Why would anyone post something like that?" A posting board was for information, notices, people looking for others, news of work and other important stuff. Taking up space for some common sense didn't make any sense. "I know," the man snorted. "Crazy, right?" The shopkeeper walked away, shaking his head. Maybe it wasn't common sense here, but he didn't understand why that would be. A girl with a bucket of fish bumped into him and stumbled, nearly falling into the mud. She wobbled forward with her bucket before managing to right herself and shuffled up the street with her burden. He eyed the thin skirt that clung to her slender legs for a while, then decided to follow her. Concealing himself as best as he could, he trailed the girl from a few dozen meters away, weaving his way through the men and women whose eyes were filled with their own troubles. Away from the wharves she went, up the slope into the city proper. He slowed his pace as the girl walked by a pair of militia, whose eyes scanned the crossroads where they were posted. One of them looked directly at him. He sent his gaze to the ground as he walked by the sentry. "I'm just another kid. Just a war orphan. A dirty war orphan that adults have no time for. I don't have anything, I'm no one. No one." He felt the sentry's gaze leave him. Slipping past them when they looked the other way, he walked quickly to find the girl who had gone far ahead. After searching past several blocks, he found the girl again. She had stopped partway into a dark alley. The bucket of fish was at her feet and she shook her hands with a pained look. No one else was around. He smiled as he entered the alley, quickly making his way toward her. Then, he stopped and looked to the side. "You need to wear something under your shirt," he said. "I can see everything." "A poor girl like me can't afford it," the girl replied. "Besides, there are a lot of girls like me to look at." He frowned as she wrung out her dirty blonde hair. She was wrong. She was a lot nicer looking than the other girls and that always brought trouble. "A shawl, then," he said. "At least get a shawl or mantle." "If I can't afford a shift, then how can I afford a mantle?" The girl frowned. "I don't think the cook would let me wear one anyway." "What do you mean?" "It means what it means. He sent me out on purpose in the rain so he could look at me in my wet clothes. The last time it happened he kicked the bucket over and told me to pick up all the fish. Then he watched me from behind as I bent over to do it. I bet he's gonna do it again." "Can I kill him?" "No." He sighed. The girl pulled off one of her straw sandals, balancing herself on one leg as she whacked the mud off on the alley wall. She put the sandal back on and switched to the other foot. He didn't do anything to you, did he?" "No. He's not allowed to. Not even touching. The Viscount wants to pluck me first." Anger swelled within him. The girl put her other sandal back on. Then she glanced at his clenched fist. "Well?" she said. "Where is it?" He pulled a package from his belt, holding it out to her. As she reached out to take it, his mouth fell open. "Your face." Hot anger rose again. "I thought he wasn't supposed to touch you." The girl's fingers went to the swollen bruise marring her cheek. "This wasn't him," she said. "This was from one of the parlor maids." "Why would another maid do that to you?" "Jealousy," the girl smirked, taking the brown paper package from his hand. She was the Viscount's favorite, until I came along. She unwrapped the package, sifting through its contents with a finger. There were several small ceramic jars and vials, plus a folded piece of paper. Her lips moved silently as she read what was on it. Hold this, she said. He found the open package back in his hands. The girl picked up one of the jars and unscrewed the cap. Wait, he said, are you allowed to do that? Yup. She gingerly sniffed the contents before scooping out a bit of white cream with her fingers. The bruise on her cheek vanished as she rubbed in the cream, leaving her usual pristine skin, or maybe it was even nicer than before. Oh, even the pain goes away. The girl flashed him a grin. He felt a frown forming on his face. Wait a minute, he said. Did you bait her into hitting you? Maybe. Her topaz blue eyes seemed to shimmer in the daylight coming from the street. She definitely did. What happened to the parlor maid? Who knows? The girl put the jar back into the pile, wrapped it up again. She bent down to pull the fish out of her bucket as he did so. The package went to the bottom of the bucket before the fish went back in again. Time to go, the girl said. I'll see you tonight. They parted ways and he came out of the opposite end of the alley. More people filled the streets and wagons full of debris were occasionally carted by. What to do? He didn't think there was much left to see of the harbor city. At first, everything was new and exciting. He had never seen the ocean before, nor were there any ships where he came from. The buildings looked different and the people behaved in weird ways. He wasn't fond of the food, which seemed to be non-stop fish and seaweed soup. Then again, they did just go through a crazy war and their food stores were ransacked over the fall and winter. They were lucky to have the ocean to fish in and even luckier that the nearby demi-humans were friendly. He even saw merfolk and sea giants that came to the city to trade. There's supposed to be a sea dragon too. Maybe if I go watch long enough I'll see it? Probably not. A dragon wouldn't swim around the city just to be seen and it likely had better things to do. A distant bell tolled, marking 4 hours to noon. His attention turned to the temple from which it had sounded. It wasn't a temple of his faith, but it reminded him that he should be doing his job as best he could. What's why that shopkeeper thought those words were crazy. The people here didn't worship the 6 great gods, they worshipped the 4. He didn't really care for gods or religion until recently, but, now that he thought about it, the priests of the 4 in his old town preached all sorts of stupid things. They said to be good and kind and virtuous, but no one listened to them. What they preached didn't get him a roof over his head or ease the gnawing in his belly. It didn't save him from the thugs that came looking to beat him every time he earned a copper coin. Weakness is sin. Become strong. He pondered the words. It was right and wrong at the same time, but he couldn't figure out what exactly about it was right and wrong. With a shake of his head, he took a deep breath and focused on his surroundings as he wandered the streets. It wasn't the time to think about stuff like that. The bustle of the city had increased, punctuated by the sounds of construction. Many buildings had been ruined by the demi-human occupation and many people from the inland territories came to the sea to avoid starvation. A city of tents had sprung up around the city's broken walls, but it wasn't houses that they built first. Industrial buildings like smithies, mills and others that supplied equipment and materials for reconstruction were raised right away. Trade, which had been paralyzed in the war, was starting to return and the first galleons were arriving with charcoal from the south. Now that they had fuel, equipment salvaged from the war was being reforged into tools as the people fought to catch up with 2 seasons of lost work. Ahead of him, a small crowd had formed. He squeezed himself in to see what was going on. In front of a platform in the city's central square, 2 men with brown hair and brown beards faced one another. Behind the one on the left were several members of the city militia, which probably made him a city official. Behind the one on the right were strong-looking men adorned in blue and yellow livery, which probably made him a noble. Count Dominguez, the man on the left said in a long-suffering voice. We need you to keep your men here. For security. I sympathize with your situation, Count Dominguez replied. But I need them for security. Surely you understand? The retinue that I brought with me to help liberate the North is the same retinue that keeps my land safe. I cannot simply abandon my obligations to assist you with yours. The more lawless my domain becomes, the less it will produce and the less food we can send you in the winter. Surely you don't need all of them, my lord. My retinue is this large precisely because it is what I need to police my territory, the Count replied. I do not dress up men in equipment and pay for their livelihoods out of some decadent desire to turn war into a hobby. Remune is secured and it was the last occupied city in the kingdom. The official bobbed his head empathetically in agreement, but still pressed his case. Remune might be free, but the war isn't over yet. We still have pockets of demi-humans hiding all over the countryside. That would be the problem of the local lords. The local lords are dead. Yes, but that doesn't make it my problem. Furthermore, I have no right to march an army around in the north. Without a lord, this land defaults to the jurisdiction of the royal army. Petition His Majesty for assistance. But the city? Viscount Sons has generously offered to stay in the city because Marquis Bodipo has generously offered to keep an eye on his vassal's territory. I, on the other hand, have no such luxury, and it isn't as if we've abandoned you. Good day to you, sir. Count Dominguez turned on his heel, leaving the square with his bodyguard. The official crumpled his black felt hat in his fist, releasing a frustrated sigh. But you've abandoned us to Viscount Sons, he muttered. Concerned murmurs filled the air around him. It appeared that Viscount Sons had a bad reputation. His stomach churned as he thought of the girl he had parted ways with. Would she be safe? Trust the job. That was what they had been taught. Trust the job. Trust everyone that did their little part of it. That, of course, meant doing his little part because people trusted him to do it. Betraying that trust made him worse than scum, and there was probably a place worse than any hell waiting for him if he did. The last part was spoken of with a strange air of certainty by the people who trained him. He had no idea how the job would end, but he would only need to wait a while longer to find out. All he needed to do was do his part. Evening came and the rain only grew more intense. He made his way to the rich part of the city, or what was left of it, walking by torches guttering under the deluge that pounded the street. Whenever militia patrols came into view, he picked his pace up into a jog as if he was merely rushing across to the other side of the district. On the west end, Viscount Sons had claimed a mostly intact manor that formerly belonged to a local lord. After a quick check of the surroundings, he concealed himself in a messy, untended hedgerow across from the manor grounds. An hour later, bobbing lights appeared through the evening murk. A column of riders came thundering down the street. 24 men and women in white and blue tabards over shining armor stopped in front of the manor. Several held magical torches aloft. The woman at the head of the column dismounted, her bob of brown hair bouncing as her boots hit the cobblestones. By order of the Holy King, the woman declared to the footman at the gate, Viscount Sons is to submit to our inspection. The two footmen gaped wordlessly at the woman for several seconds before one turned to run towards the manor entrance. A man in a silken house robe appeared 5 minutes later, accompanied by a handful of retainers. A parasol held up by a maid shielded his ashen hair from the downpour. City folk crossing the district stopped to watch the confrontation. He slipped out from his place in the hedgerow to join them. Captain Custodio, the man's waxed, greying goatee wagged in the torchlight. What is the meaning of this? In reply, Captain Custodio held out a scroll. The Viscount took it in his hands. His expression grew incredulous as his eyes went back and forth. This is, huh? The noble was so flabbergasted that it was all he could manage. His utterly bewildered expression seemed fixed on his face as Captain Custodio raised a hand. Secure Lord Sons's household and bring them out here. You know what we're looking for? Yes, ma'am. Half of the people with Captain Custodio stormed into the house while the other half moved to surround the building. Screams and startled shouts rose from behind the gate. I still don't understand what is going on here, Captain Custodio, Viscount Sons said. If it is in error, my lord, you have our apologies. We have evidence that points to what you've read on the warrant strongly being the case. In the meantime, thank you for your cooperation. Even if there is evidence, the increasingly soggy-looking Viscount said, it must be some sort of plot to frame me, except this is so utterly preposterous that one could only think it a joke. Captain Custodio did not reply. The noble frowned at her lack of a response, then sighed. 10 minutes later, the manor staff lined up along the street. They all glanced worriedly at the heavily armed and armored figures watching over them. 2 women with magic torches went from opposite ends of the line, inspecting each of the servants. Captain Custodio, one of them said. Over here. The woman stood at the girl he had met that morning. Captain Custodio came over with a man holding another magic torch. Viscount Sance tried to follow, but two men barred his way. "This should be it, right?" the woman said. "There's no way a serving girl would look like this." "No," Captain Custodio said. "Senior household staff are usually nobles, but she's a bit young." What's your post?" I work in the scullery, milady." Captain Custodio and the other woman exchanged looks. "Right," Captain Custodio said. "So she's not a noble. Tell me, girl, have you always looked this pretty?" The girl glanced toward Viscount Sance and swallowed. She looked back at Captain Custodio and nodded. "I see. She's lying to you, milady." A maid two servants down cried out, "She's a liar. There was a mark on her cheek yesterday and now it's gone. A witch. She has to be a witch. A demi-human witch." Captain Custodio's head drew back at her outburst. She looked back and forth between the girl and the other maid with a baffled expression. In front of the gate, Viscount Sance spluttered incoherently. The two women drew the girl away. "I don't think you're a witch," Captain Custodio said in a low voice, "and I certainly don't think you're a demi-human, but can you tell us why you could get rid of that mark?" My lord likes me pretty," she said. "He likes the way I look. He said he would." The girl blushed and looked down. The two women followed her gaze to her dress, which had turned next to transparent in the rain. "That sick son of a..." Captain Custodio muttered. "We just fought a war against those monsters, but we still have ones wearing human skin." "Captain." Three men jogged out of the gate. One was carrying a familiar brown paper parcel in his hand. He went over to Captain Custodio and handed it over. "We found it in the solar, Captain," the man said. "In the back of one of his drawers. The stolen formulas are in there, as well." The five armored figures leaned forward as she unwrapped it, and then four of them stepped back as Captain Custodio's face twisted in rage. "Seize that thief!" She pointed at the Viscount with a roar. "What?" Viscount Sance jumped in shock. I have my rights." "And gag him." "Viscount Sance, you are charged with the theft of crown assets. That being said, I would think you could have done better than stealing our dear Holy Queen's beauty products." All around them, the gathered crowd exploded into a fury no less intense than the expression on Captain Custodio's face. "Have you no shame? Is nothing sacred? Our poor Holy Queen. You thieving girl. Coming late to the war and trying to steal everything. Make him swim back south. Chain him up and sink him into the bay. Feed him to the merfolk." The crowd surged forward. The men and women who had come to take the Viscount away suddenly found themselves defending him against the angry mob. People were idiots. Something tugged on his mantle. The girl had snuck out in the commotion, giving him a look and a nod. They ran off into the night. "Did you check the way out?" she asked. "Yeah, it's all clear," he answered. "Carly should be waiting for us." They hurried along the road and then descended off of it as they went under a bridge to follow a river north. Rimian's wall had all sorts of holes in it and the part over the river was completely torn down. "Hey, do you have my mantle? I'm freezing here." "Where's your clasp?" "I left it with you." "Why would a scullery maid have a magic item?" He reached into the bag slung behind him, pulling out a dark woolen mantle. The silver clasp enchanted with endure elements was carefully fixed to it. He tossed it over and the girl unfolded it, throwing it over her shoulders. Their path continued north along the river and they used the high grass along the shore to help conceal themselves. They stopped to watch the soldiers patrolling along the broken wall. Once they figured out the patrol's timing, they snuck out through a gap and kept going. An hour later, they came to a lake surrounded by tall reeds and willow trees. He slapped the cold surface several times with the palm of his hand. A head popped out of the water, followed by a long neck. A frost dragon swam over to the shore, her long body undulating like a snake. Liam, her turquoise eyes shone dimly in the night. "Say, welcome back." "Thanks, Carly," Say smiled. Were you here all this time?" "Of course not," Caliciel replied. "This place has too many humans running around with stubby things. I was doing deliveries. I must have flown back and forth between Erantal and the Abelian Hills 3 times." The frost dragon loped onto the shore, shaking herself free of water. Say went over to open the infinite haversack strapped to her neck. What was it like? Say asked. The Abelian Hills? Well, there were hills, but I didn't see anything that might be Abelians. No one there knew what an Abelian was, either. Say pulled out a double-seated saddle. Liam helped to fasten the harness onto Calasiel while Say changed into a tight leather outfit that wouldn't catch the wind. They strapped on their flight caps before ascending into the rain. The frost dragon kept going until she broke through the clouds and leveled out over them. Liam removed his goggles to wipe away the fog. Say turned her head up at the field of stars above. I really like flying at night. I don't see why that is, Calasiel said. I thought humans can't see in the dark. It's still pretty. If you say so, the frost dragon replied. After 60 years or so you might think differently about it. Calasiel was around 70 years old, which, according to one of their teachers, meant that she was around Liam's age in human years. They first met her when she joined their classes at the orphanage. She did seem to speak like them, but the way she acted depended on what she was doing. Stalking people and scaring them half to death seemed to be her favorite thing to do, but so far Liam hadn't seen her attack anything but wild animals. She was almost like a cat, a talking, 6-meter-long cat with wings and scales. Liam scanned the moonlit blanket below, trying to figure out where they were headed. The only things he could see were the different mountain ranges poking up above the clouds. To the east were the southern border ranges that separated Riestais from the Abelian wilderness. In the distance to the northeast were the Azalisia Mountains. "Where are you taking us?" he asked. Rantel, Calasiel answered. "Those were my delivery orders, at any rate. I have no idea what's waiting for you there. Did you get anything for me by the way?" It's not like we could carry stuff," Liam replied. "Well, I have some Roble coins, I guess." "Coins are good. I like coins. They're copper coins." "Oh." Calasiel winged swiftly to the northeast, faster than anything that Liam could have imagined a year ago. Their flight from Rantel to the Holy Kingdom of Roble had been just as swift, taking all of 5 hours to arrive over the ocean. According to Calasiel, her big sister could be twice as fast. "So what just happened?" Liam asked. "Did we destroy that noble?" "He got in big trouble, at least," Say answered with a yawn. "That wasn't the goal though." "Then what were we here for?" "To stir the pot," Say replied. "Making the people of the city mad at that noble. I think they already knew how bad he was, so it was easy to make it worse." "But why?" "Who knows?" Say shrugged in front of him. "That was the job. Apprentices don't need to know." Say had an easier time getting used to their new work. She was clever and could get people to do things in the weirdest ways. Over a month previous, they were called into Orphanage Director Ralpha's office where they found a girl around their age by the name of Shiltia waiting for them. Well, she wasn't actually a girl around their age, she was a vampire and they didn't know how old she was. She was older than them, at least. She spoke really proper and acted like a noblewoman with a fancy dress and everything. The orphanage director told them that they were being recruited for some work. She had a certain look on her face while she told them, a sort of odd look that was worried and happy for them at the same time. It was an honor, supposedly, but Miss Alpha didn't say what she was worried over. Lady Shiltia had selected them because they had worked for her vassals before, Countess Corlin, Countess Wagner, Baroness Gonye and Baroness Saradnik, and she thought they would be useful again. Liam and Say were more than happy to help the people who had saved them from Facet County. They were real nobles, not like the ones that bullied the people with their power and did all sorts of mean things, but ones that did their jobs properly. From there, Lady Shiltia whisked them away through a hole in the air where a woman named Tyra, the same woman who had given him the package in the alley, waited for them. She was one of the officers of the Sorceress Kingdom's intelligence division and they were to be trained in the arts of espionage, assassination, sabotage and all sorts of other clandestine and covert operations. A lot of what she wanted from them was what Liam was already doing in Facet County, so it seemed that Lady Shiltia had picked the right person. He was worried about Say, except she took to it faster than he did. She did things differently, but Tyra always laughed about how his little sister was outshining him. Not that he minded. After about 2 weeks of crazy training that included learning how to fight and kill people, Tyra sent them off on their first job. Liam voiced his worries over only having 2 weeks of training, but Tyra waved her hand dismissively and told them that it would be easy. She was right. "Are you going to sleep?" "Huh?" "Say is already sleeping." Don't humans sleep at night? Liam leaned forward to look around Say's shoulder. His sister was sound asleep, her leather vest rising and falling gently with her soft breaths. She was probably the only person in the world who could fall asleep thousands of meters in the air, hurtling forward at gods knew what speed. They arrived at the Frost Dragon Aviary in Erantle in the middle of the night. Despite it being so late, 3 people were waiting for them. Tyra had arrived ahead of them, probably from using one of those holes in the air. Lady Shiltir was there as well. The third person was a smiling man in a red suit with orange stripes. He wasn't a human, he had pointy ears, so he was an elf. But he also had a long spiked tail that waved lightly behind him. So, Tyra said, "What do you think?" "I doubt anyone can say that it isn't a pass," the pointy-eared man said. "It also serves to help prove one of Pandora's actor's theories. There were no critical failures and Say's manipulative techniques were quite interesting. Delectable for one so young, if I may say so myself. Since you managed things the way that you did, can you tell me what your work accomplished?" "We were polishing our skills," Liam said. "And we were learning how to blend into a foreign harbor city." "Those are indeed some of the reasons why you were deployed," Demiurge nodded. "Is there anything more?" Liam fell silent. What sort of answer did he want? "We were sowing discord," Say said. "The Holy Kingdom just had a war. People from the south came to help finish the war, but now they have to go back home to work. But the people from the north are still scared and they want them to stay just in case something happens." The people already didn't like Viscount Sans, so it was easy to frame him. But Viscount Sans has friends and those friends will stand up for him because nobles stick to one another like that. The North and the South will start to resent one another from this, and the important people who are directly involved are going to become the main targets. Unless someone can fix what's going on, everything bad that happens to one side will be blamed on the other and things will just get worse. Demiurge's spectacles glinted as he flashed a broad grin. "Very good," he said. "Very good, indeed. Though you do not have any power of note, you already understand how to leverage what you have to exponential effect. How old are you, Say?" 12. "In that case, I look forward to your development with interest. Tyra, be sure to see to the development of these young talents. It just so happens that one of our Grandmaster infiltrators has recently returned to us," Tyra replied, "so they'll have the best training on this side of the continent, Lord Demiurge." Lord Demiurge nodded and turned his attention to Lady Shiltir. "Your intuition is as sharp as always, Shiltir," he said. "The Ministry of Transportation's investigative division appears to be off to a flying start." "Then I guess we can move on to the real work," Lady Shiltir said. "Real work, my lady?" Say asked. "Yes," Lady Shiltir smiled. "You are now official employees of the Ministry of Transportation. Your next job will be to help conquer a kingdom. Weakness is a sin. Become stronger." Liam finally realized what was wrong with those words. The clerics at the Erantle Cathedral never said weakness was a sin or demanded that people become stronger. There was no need to deny weakness and become stronger, they only needed to become better at what they already were. They didn't need to become rich or famous or powerful. Excellence could be found in all things, and the meek still possessed many blessings. The faith of the Six acknowledged weakness and cultivated what gifts people had. With those gifts, a noble with all of his riches, power, servants and allies could be toppled by a poor, weak orphan from the alleys of Facet Town. "When do we start?" Liam asked. "My, so eager." Lady Shiltir's crimson eyes seemed to flare. "You have some time yet, to train and refine your craft. I suppose as mortals you require rest, as well. Also, Yuri has been asking after the two of you." Lady Shiltir looked at Lord Demiurge, a question on her doll-like face. 2 weeks, at most." The elf with the tail's words seemed to trail in the air, then he nodded. "Yes, 2 weeks, and your work will begin." Liam shared a smile with his sister. 2 weeks. They couldn't wait to start. "Today, we give thanks to the gods that beings like ourselves are still alive. Today, we give thanks to the gods that beings like ourselves are still alive. Thus do we offer our thanks," Themis said. After thanking the gods for merely existing, the cleric of Sursana continued on to deliver a simple sermon. The admittedly wholesome, and boring, content that spoke of the fruits of righteous labor was at great odds with the hymn that the congregation sang before settling down, which sounded as if they were about to unapologetically destroy 3 or 4 countries. It was apparently Ludmilla's favorite hymn, which didn't surprise her, but it seemed that many highly favored it. Since a sermon in Ludmilla's territory was an unprecedented event, they chose it because it was popular? That was what Leanne wanted to believe, at any rate. If it was instead purposely selected, she didn't want to think about why that was. Leanne and Florine were not attending the noonday service, but since it was being held in a yard near where they were waiting, they could hear most of what was going on. Why do Clara and Ludmilla have to attend? They already went this morning. They're Ludmilla's subjects, so why wouldn't she go to attend a rare event with them? And I don't think you need to wonder why Clara would be with her. I guess. The whole construction camp had been informed in advance of the service, so everything was neatly put away before the laborers went to attend. There wasn't a single person who didn't go, so Leanne and Florine felt that it would be more than a bit awkward to wander around on their own. I don't get why they look so happy. She's preaching about work, for crying out loud. We both like our work. It's not difficult to empathize with them. You're just angry because your expectations were betrayed. Leanne crossed her arms and humphed. Florine was right, of course. She wanted to hear some fiery preaching about the virtues of genocide and all the other things that common knowledge applied to the faith of the Six. Ludmilla always killed the crap out of everything and treated it no differently than doing paperwork. Then again, Themis was preaching about work, and killing the crap out of everything was Ludmilla's work. This religion feels more like a productivity cult. It's hard to believe that the faith of the Four came out of it. Well, it makes sense that the temples of the Four would try to come up with distinctive doctrines and culture to separate themselves from the old religion. Sure, but this is way different. The framework of virtue and righteousness was entirely different in the faith of the Six. Morality was practical, generally revolving around increasing the congregation's chances for long-term survival. The culture that sprung out of it was a matrix of protocols that attempted to seamlessly optimize every aspect of society so that humanity might survive and thrive. Spirituality was paradoxically inseparable from temporal matters, and it was weird. For instance, in the faith of the Four, acts of charity were considered fundamentally good. To help those in need was something that enriched the soul. It made some people feel better about themselves and gave others a chance at life. Charity was a wholesome, moral act that was lauded by the temples. In the faith of the Six, charity was an investment that generated societal returns. There was nothing about enriching the soul or feeling good or whatever. This investment went to temple staff who looked out for those who slipped through the cracks of society and allocated resources to them. These resources bought time for the temples to nurture or rehabilitate individuals for the greater cause of keeping humanity from going extinct, filling roles that saw to the maintenance, development and growth of their civilization. Like many religions, all aspects of life were addressed by tenets of the faith. This created something frightening when one considered the temporal focus of the faith of the Six. Observing the tenets of most religions generated spiritual returns. Being a good person in the faith of the Four just meant that you were a morally good person, but that morality did not necessarily bring success. Unscrupulous and cold-hearted individuals could be wildly successful, and all good people could do was console themselves with the notion that they were better off spiritually. With the faith of the Six, adherence to doctrine resulted in real and tangible gains that served to reinforce one's beliefs. Their doctrines also resulted in an entirely different morality that was eerily out of phase or just wildly off. On the surface, many things might be conflated with the beliefs of others because it aimed to create what most considered a functional society. People were generally pleased with their lives and they all appeared to be good. But they weren't. Not in the sense that followers of the Four considered good, at least. Living a moral life involved figuring out where one's abilities lay, striving to do one's best at their chosen vocation and thus contributing to the survival of their society. Even those who brought harm to society were weighed and measured in a pragmatic way. Criminals paid their debt to society, but, within the bounds of the law, efforts were also made to put them back on the right path, the moral path, according to their doctrines. The misguided were assessed and offered a chance to put their talents to work. A prolific thief was fundamentally a rogue and their skills could be employed in beneficial ways. The same could be said for nearly everyone so long as their behavior was not inherently problematic. Ludmilla's tale of throwing the bratty Clara Corlinavold into the Katza River could be seen as an act of righteous anger that turned the radiant jewel of the Riverlands from a contemptuous moniker to a genuine one. As for the one who had been subjected to that religious experience, Clara was often compared to an angel nowadays. Those who knew her were hard-pressed to say otherwise. She was a paragon of good in her faith's sense, a guiding light to her people whether it came to her benevolent and progressive rule or the fact that there were very few that she could not redeem. The irredeemable few would find less mercy in her than in the heart of a devil. Good and evil were all jumbled up, at least by the moral standards that Leanne, Florian and the vast majority of the people in the North grew up with. A shady organization that performed acts of assassination, sabotage, and subversion would be considered a morally good organization so long as its efforts contributed to the greater good of civilization. If they followed the tenets of the faith and got really damn good at it, all the better. A known assassin who had murdered countless people could walk openly into a cathedral, receive a warm welcome and be hailed as a paragon. Soup kitchens that simply fed the starving without any efforts at guidance were considered wasteful at best and evil at worst. The same rationale went into pretty much everything. Misallocation of resources was sinful conduct deserving of a level of castigation that made the offender seem like a mass murderer. Not the good ones, the evil ones. Additionally, cultivating one's bloodline by producing offspring with an appropriate partner was a moral imperative. This was where Leanne thought she might finally find some point of contention between her friends and their faith, except they were infuriatingly practical about that, as well. In hindsight, it was an approach that shouldn't have been a surprise as loveless unions to produce heirs was a normal expectation for noble women. Across the way, the congregation filling the empty yard stirred, marking the conclusion of the midday service. Leanne rose from where she had been seated on a partially carved granite block, dusting off the back of her skirt. Ludmilla and Clara came out to join them. "Ready to take a look around?" Ludmilla asked. "No," Leanne answered. "I'm not done sitting here yet." "Themis and Alessia aren't coming?" "They will join us once they have finished speaking with some acquaintances who migrated here from the city," Ludmilla replied. "Was there something you wanted to see first?" The construction camp had everything one might have expected out of one in an undeveloped wilderness. Within a large palisade that separated the camp from the nearby forest was housed every industry required for construction and laying down infrastructure. The only thing that appeared to be absent was, strangely enough, a smithy. According to Ludmilla, this was because raw materials for everything else could be procured from the nearby area and it was ultimately more efficient to produce the metalwork required at the harbor's forge facilities. This wouldn't have been the case if not for the efficiency of transport in the Sorceress Kingdom, which made for many unfamiliar new paradigms in industrial and economic thinking. Corlin Harbor was probably the premier example of the changes wrought over the past year, but any urban center designed for their new technologies would rapidly follow suit. Warden's Vale was no exception. The only thing that was holding the frontier territory back was skilled labor, which no one had to spare. Leanne's gaze drifted from facility to facility, then stopped at one that was uncharacteristic for a construction camp. "Let's try the alchemist first." "That's a weird choice," Florian said. "No," Leanne replied, "I'm choosing it because it's weird." They strolled along a street laid with the prefabricated paving stones that were rapidly becoming ubiquitous to their territories. The street itself was divided into pedestrian and wagon lanes. Dividing the two lanes was a gutter that channeled rainwater to the nearby river. The alchemist's workshop was located in the south-central area of the camp. In addition to the workshop itself, a large warehouse was attached to the back. Unlike most of the buildings around it, which were fashioned from timber, the workshop was constructed out of stone. Out of a sloped roof poked two sets of chimneys that streamed milky vapors over the storage lots nearby. A bell chimed as a Death Knight footman held the door open for them. "Welcome." A young woman looked up from her mortar and pestle. "Oh, Lady Zaradnik." "Good afternoon, Miss Pam," Ludmilla smiled. Have you decided on a surname yet?"
Not yet.
Whenever I think I've finally settled on one, I change my mind. I guess I'll be stuck with just Pam for a while." Pam set down her tools, wiping her hands on her apron before placing them on the counter. "Is there something I can do for you, my lady?" "We just came around to take a look at how things are going in the upper reaches," Ludmilla said. "How do you like your new workshop?" "It's great," Pam replied enthusiastically. It's twice as big as Miss Lanez's workshop in Iranthal. But it might be a bit too much for someone like me. Miss Lanez's reports indicate that you are making the most out of it, Ludmilla replied. So it seems to me that it suits you just fine. You have come a long way in the past few months. The alchemist blushed slightly, her lips twitching up into a little smile as she fidgeted at Ludmilla's remark. I don't think I've ever seen Ludmilla do this before. Is she flirting with this girl? Florine shot her a look. She's just complimenting her. Why are you saying this all of the sudden? I dunno, 'cause she's like that. What she said after she caught me the other day made me all squirmy inside. Squirmy? Leanne, you're not. I'm not. She wasn't. Ludmilla was just Ludmilla. Once one got over how scary she was, Ludmilla was powerful, stoic and gallant, just like Ludwig from Dreams of Red. Wait a minute. This is probably your fault. Huh? Ignoring Florine's perplexed look, Leanne wandered deeper into the workshop. A row of shiny new alchemical burners lined the wall behind the counter. Shelves stocked with curatives, industrial substances and magic items stood opposite the counter to them. You make magic items here as well? Leanne asked. No, they're imported from Warden's Vale, Pam answered. I'm just an alchemist. Well, an apprentice alchemist. 3/4 of the alchemical goods you see in stock here are imported from there as well. I can't make those yet. What do you make here, then? First-tier healing potions. Our inventories are full up and it's the most valuable thing I can brew for export. The price for them shot up over the winter so the company's profits have been crazy. Don't I know it? Leanne grinned. It was because the Imperial Army snapped them all up. House Wagner's companies had made a pretty penny on the Empire's winter campaigns. House Cognier and House Corlin had made off like bandits as well. It was an obvious, yet little considered benefit of being a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom. When their nation moved, so did the markets. Being privy to the affairs of the nation and the members of its hegemony was an extraordinarily lucrative affair. Ludmilla frowned in her direction. Leanne ungrinned. Do you mean to say that you have been profiteering while I was running around all over the place? Why wouldn't we? Leanne replied, if someone's gonna profit, it may as well be us. You should have spoken with me about it first. Leanne furrowed her brow. Why? Because merchant companies from the Sorceress Kingdom suddenly doing something like that en masse is suggestive of what actions our country might take in the future. Wait, how can you be so dumb about merchant stuff yet notice something like this? Because it's a strategic concern, Ludmilla told her. In this case, it gave you an edge over your competitors, but imagine what would happen if there were other nations involved. We'd squash them? Besides, it's not a bad strategy. Governments are usually at least a degree of separation away from their merchants so their ability to read and react to changes in the market stinks. We, on the other hand, have merchants who are part of the government and it's an advantage that we should exploit. Once the Sorceress Kingdom developed enough economic clout, it could force countries to capitulate without shedding a drop of blood on the battlefield. This felt far more productive than wrecking everything with Death Series servitors. We have allies to keep in mind as well, Clara said. As well as any wider effects to other parties. The potential magnitude of what you are suggesting goes beyond upsetting the economic balance of a single country. A small voice came from the counter. At the risk of sounding rude, who are you? Why has my shop become a place to plot the downfall of countries? We don't plan on destroying any countries, Miss Pam, Florine said reassuringly. Not yet, any woof. Florine's elbow found her ribs. I apologize, Miss Pam, Ludmilla said. I did not mean for our discussion to go in that direction. As for who they are, I wanted to avoid a commotion, but this is Countess Corlin, Countess Wagner, and Baroness Cognier. Pam's eyes grew wide and her mouth fell open. She visibly shrunk in on herself. I am so sorry. The apprentice alchemist lowered her head multiple times. Please destroy as many countries from my workshop as you wish. Tea, I should get some tea. But I only have beakers. Leanne wondered how people would feel if their countries were overturned over tea. Not that something like that would ever happen. There is no need, Ludmilla told Pam. As I said, they just wanted to take a look around. Speaking of which, how goes your cataloging of local resources? There's a lot of stuff. Pam appeared to settle down somewhat. There's plenty of what the ranger kids brought in when I was working in Warden's Vale, plus all sorts of other things. The warehouse is still filled with inventory to catalogue. Anything valuable so far? Leanne asked. It's hard to say whether any one thing will be valuable in the long run, my lady, Pam replied. At least when it comes to products for export. Reagents harvested in wild areas tend to be more effective than those cultivated in gardens and such. The problem is that they're wild, meaning the best you can probably find the patches of them here and there. On top of that, there are dangers that come with going into the wild, and a business would have to hire someone to retrieve it or hire an escort if they were doing it themselves. Which adds to overhead. Pam nodded. Not only that, she added. It takes time if you do it yourself. If you spend a week harvesting herbs in a forest somewhere, that's a week you're not in your workshop making potions. It's a waste of mana unless there's a shortage of reagents. On top of that, a small workshop might be able to find enough reagents to make their own special potions, but a big company like ours wouldn't. You have the whole of the upper reaches, Ludmilla noted. Development will be minimal here, so there is a huge area to collect those wild reagents from. Once you secure the cooperation of the local tribes, you will have what you need. Miss Lanez mentioned something like that, my lady, Pam said. But, well, we haven't been able to secure any kind of cooperation yet. The tribespeople stay out in the woods. Maybe the closest they've come are those camps that they've made on the far side of the lake. Those are just the ones that you can see, Ludmilla told her. They are likely much closer than you think. Yeah, okay, that won't give her nightmares or anything. A part of why Ludmilla was so scary to others was in how she made casually horrifying statements. It was to the point that people just assumed everything she said had some dire implication. Unlike her, most people did not have wills of highly enchanted adamantite alloy. For some reason, they left the alchemist's workshop on that ominous note. Themis and Alessia were standing nearby, looking up and down the street. The paladin tapped the cleric on the pauldron when her gaze crossed over them. We were about to cross the bridge to see if you were on the island, Themis said. I know that the camp is not very large, but the surroundings feel so vast that one might get lost. I left my footmen outside, Ludmilla replied. Well, I suppose they are hard to distinguish from one another if one is unused to them. You can tell the difference between them? Themis asked. What do you use for reference? The general feeling that they give off? My subjects seem to be able to tell them apart as well. I should probably add something so visitors know who is who. What would they do with that knowledge? It wasn't as if people regularly interacted with Death Knights anyway. They continued their tour of the construction camp, which mostly used old technology created out of conventional crafting techniques. The only machinery from Leanne's workshops could be found in the wagons hauling cargo and the two undead-powered mills that processed timber and stone. Overall, the camp was more of an industrial village that resembled those that House Wagner employed before the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Next on their tour was an island raised by Lord Mayor in a lake that had also been created by the Dark Elf Druid. Lord Mayor had widened a section of the river at the confluence of two of its tributaries in the south-central portion of the Highland Basin. The new lake filled the valley where the old road to Warden's Vale crossed over to ascend the pass to the slain theocracy in the southeast. This made the new island, with its bridges that connected the far shores, the strategic and logistical center of the upper reaches. The stone bridge was wide enough to accommodate 3 wagons side by side, as well as a pedestrian walkway. It stretched roughly 300 meters across their side of the lake to an island which was about 2 kilometers long and a kilometer wide. Leanne eyed the barren stone as they made their way across. You must have something for rocks surrounded by water, she said. I like rocks surrounded by water, Ludmilla replied. So does Lord Mayor, apparently. Do you not think they are nice, safe and defensible? Ludmilla's tendency to turn everything into a strategic or tactical matter only seemed to get stronger as time went by. Or maybe she was always like that and now felt comfortable enough to openly show how different she was from everyone else. That might be true, Leanne said, but everything you do is a lot more expensive than necessary. It's not as efficient either. It might seem that way, Ludmilla told her. But time and positioning are paid for in blood when things are not so peaceful. I have no idea who in the world would attack the Sorcerer's Kingdom given how powerful it is. We do not need to imagine who would attack the Sorcerer's Kingdom, Ludmilla said. We need only understand how powerful they would be. Leanne didn't understand exactly how powerful that was, but she did understand that moats and the defenses that they could construct didn't stand a chance if something that could actually challenge the Sorcerer's Kingdom came along.
It seems kinda pointless, she said.
Even if you fully fortified this island, someone like Lady Sheltier could sink it into the lake in 5 minutes. Well, it is harder than you think to sink an island, but she might be able to flatten every structure on the island in 5 minutes.
Same difference, Leanne said. What's the point?
The point is, as I said before, Ludmilla told her. Time and positioning. 5 minutes spent dealing with a fortified position is 5 minutes purchased for our side to act. There will be other fortified positions, too. If each delays an invader by an additional 5 minutes, how many millions of lives will that save in the interior in the future? Sorry. Leanne looked down at the paving stones as they walked on in silence. Even with so much power and wealth now at their disposal, Ludmilla remained a frontier noble who sacrificed herself for duty. The way that she thought always put everyone ahead of herself, almost as if she was cursed to do so. This may as well have been the case, as Leanne didn't think that part of Ludmilla would ever change. Profits and economic efficiency occupied a distant 4th place on her list of priorities. Foremost was the defense of the realm. After that came the well-being of her subjects. Third was any development she could manage with what she had left over. In the past, Leanne would have thought this sort of person a special breed of idiot. Now, she could only consider anyone who thought the way she once did an utter ingrate. Much like the future city in Warden's Vale, the island was fashioned into distinct sections meant to host different districts. They walked a circuit around the perimeter, watching the construction crews raise the first of the settlement's buildings. I cannot quite figure out where everything goes, Alessia said. That raised part will be for a citadel or something, yes? It is, Ludmilla nodded. It probably makes more sense if you realize that the island is oriented from southwest to northeast. The southwestern third is the citadel where the army and local administration will be based. The remaining 2/3 is divided in half lengthwise, with the southeastern half allocated for industrial use. There is also a stretch in the northern part of the island at water level, which is where the harbor will be. How many people will live here? Not many, at first. I just do not have enough people to go around. For now, it will serve as a trade hub for the upper reaches. If that's the case, Florine said, you should be able to populate this island with demi-humans. Leanne gazed across the lake towards the demi-human settlements lining the eastern shore. If that happened, the island would look more like Herantle's demi-human quarter. I would like for that to happen. Ludmilla's head turned to face the distant shore as well, but they seem to be very shy at the moment. I could probably bring some goblins in to start with, but, at the same time, I want them to do things their way. We will be occupied elsewhere for the next good while, so it is probably better to let developments occur naturally. They are still going to have to get used to humans if you plan on starting trade with the theocracy, Clara said. The old road goes through tribal territory. You're gonna have traders from the theocracy? Leanne frowned. She tried to imagine what would happen if people from the theocracy had to enter a town full of demi-humans, but her imagination failed her. It was definitely something she didn't want to miss. I suspect that it will only be merchants from the Sorcerer's Kingdom going back and forth between here and the theocracy, Ludmilla said. The current route from the theocracy through Corlin County is already logistically optimal. There is no compelling incentive for foreign merchants to visit a tiny territory like mine. Ludmilla's population might amount to a tiny market, but her territory was huge. It was all the more reason to avoid it, as merchants had to travel for days to get to those tiny populations. It just wasn't worth it, and exporting goods from Warden's Vale to outlets in Corlin Harbor and Erantle was ultimately cheaper for foreign merchants because the Sorcerer's Kingdom's internal logistics were so efficient. Economic considerations are not the only ones that come with making this route available, Themis said. It will make pilgrimages easier as well. That is true, Ludmilla nodded. My expectations are not very high to begin with, so any beneficial outcome seems fine to me. It is over 100 kilometers from this settlement to the city on the other side, Alessia noted. Are there places along the way for people to rest overnight? Normally there is a town every day's travel, but this is almost pure wilderness. I still have to work out the problems with that, Ludmilla admitted. Something to the order of a fortress monastery can be built at the top of the pass, and our wagons can get from here to there in 2 hours or so. The problem is how people go from there. Even if they are just drawing passenger wagons, we cannot invade the theocracy with solitas. Maybe my work across the border will open some doors by then, Clara offered. In the worst case, we have to build a road over to my territory at some point anyway so they could go from there. They headed back over the bridge after completing their circuit of the island. Along the way, Alessia peered at something in the west. There is another road over there, yes? She pointed with a gauntleted finger. Where does that go? It follows the river west, Ludmilla said. Up to an ancient pass between those two peaks. I am actually not sure why that old road exists or who built it. There is no evidence of human habitation past this point in the Abelian wilderness. If it is wilderness, you will be claiming it? For the foreseeable future, only up to the large river on the other side. I believe that the river leads down into the theocracy, so it will be an ideal location to build another harbor. West of the river is a large grassland, but I want to make a study of it before deciding what to do. A study? Yes, Ludmilla nodded. I think we see grasslands as convenient for agricultural development, but there might be someone living there already. It seems obvious in hindsight, but all of our open plains are developed for agriculture. Other races that live in those environments cannot exactly trample over human fields, so we have to reserve a place for them. Alessia scratched her chin as they went along, looking thoughtfully towards the mountains to the west. Ludmilla's background made her more conscientious when it came to other races, but other followers of the Six were not so broad-minded. Those from the theocracy were notorious for being outright belligerent. They returned to their passenger wagon and embarked on their return trip to Warden's Vale. As the landscape swiftly rolled by, Leanne's eye couldn't help but be drawn to the snowy mountain dominating the landscape. Is it going to stay winter there all summer? She asked. I have no idea, Ludmilla answered. Everyone says that it looks nice and it is Dame Verulin's territory to do with as she pleases, but, at the same time, she had some expectations of revenue from her holdings. Revenue from what? Leanne frowned. Shipping snow? It was the same as every other peak around it before, Ludmilla said. So I suggested that she contract rangers for land management and export natural products. Uh-oh. Leanne froze. She couldn't imagine what would make Ludmilla go uh-oh. What is it? Dame Verulin did pick up some vassals from the Empire, Ludmilla explained. They are supposed to help develop the territory along the river into farmland. Ah, Leanne nodded sagely, so she's gonna ship snow from her snow farms. Shouldn't you let her know? Florine asked. I could tell her, Ludmilla answered, but I doubt it will help. She will have to experience things for herself when she gets back.